Untouchables. Who were they and why they became untouchables? By Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Part 3. Old Theories of the Origin of Untouchability. Chapter 7. Racial Difference as the Origin of Untouchability. What is the origin of untouchability? As has been said, the field is quite unexplored. No student of sociology has paid any attention to it. Writers other than sociologists who have written about India and her people have been content with merely recording the custom of untouchability with varying degrees of disapprobation and leaving it at that. So far as my research goes, I have come across only one author who has attempted to explain how untouchability has come about. It is Mr. Stanley Rice. According to Mr. Rice, there is a strong probability that the outcasts were the survivors of the conquered peoples who, as castes tended to coincide with occupation, became the drum beating, leather working, and farm laboring castes to which, as serfs, they had been relegated from early times. They were not the races conquered by the Aryans, the Parians belonging to the Aborigines who were conquered by the Dravidians, and being of a different race, they were not admitted to the totem of similar clans with which marriage is always intimately connected, since that would have led to free intercourse and the gradual degradation of race. But this prohibition cannot have been absolute. There are always exceptions. In this course of the centuries, some 40 or more, the inevitable miscegenation may very well have obliterated the racial distinctions between Aboriginal and early Dravidian. These people have been admitted to a sort of lowly participation in the Hindu system in the atmosphere of which they have lived for so long, for Hinduism is at once the most tolerant and intolerant of creeds. It does not proselytize. You cannot become a Hindu as you can become a Mussalman, and those within the fold are liable to the most rigid restrictions. But it has always been ready to embrace Aboriginal tribes who are willing to submit to its laws, though it may assign to them a very lowly place, and they have always been kept at a distance and have been excluded from the temples. It would seem, therefore, that anthropological arguments are in any case not conclusive when we consider these factors, which must have profoundly modified the original racial characteristics and must have changed their outlook. Thus, the Dravidians applied to the Parians the same test which the Aryans are assumed to have applied to the conquered inhabitants. They reduced them to the position of serfs and assigned to them those duties which it was thought beneath their own dignity to perform. Nor was marriage the only consideration. The disabilities of the Parians were due also, and to an even greater degree, to the mystical qualities inherent in taboo. To admit such a man to the totem family was not only contrary to the social order, it would bring upon the clan the anger of their particular god. But to admit him to the worship of the god within the sacred precincts of a temple was to call down authentic fire from heaven, whereby they would be consumed. It would be sacrilege of the same kind as the offering of unconsecrated or unorthodox fire by Korah, Dathan, or Abiram. But though debarred from taking an active participation in worship, the Parians might yet do the menial services connected with it, provided that they did not entail the pollution of the sacred building. In Christian terminology, the Parian, although he could neither officiate at the altar nor preach a sermon, nor even could be one of the congregation, might still ring the bell on one condition. He could not regard himself as of the communion, he was in fact excommunicate, and as such was ceremonially unclean. No washing with water, no cleansing ceremony could remove that stain which was indelibly fixed by the operation of taboo. To touch him, to have any dealings with him, save as it were at arm's length, was by a sort of contagious magic a defilement. You could employ him to till your field because that entailed no contact of any kind beyond giving an order. You need have no further communication with him. The seal of pollution was set on his forehead, it was inherent in him as surely as the blood in his veins. And so, from being the vile, degraded fellow which Indian opinion has made him, he became viler and more degraded from the kinds of occupations left open to him. The theory of Mr. Rice really divides itself into two parts, for, according to him, the origin of untouchability is to be found in two circumstances race and occupation. Obviously, they require separate conditions. This chapter will be devoted to an examination of his theory of racial difference as the origin of untouchability. The racial theory of Mr. Rice contains two elements. One, that the untouchables are non Aryan, non Dravidian Aboriginals, and two, that they were conquered and subjugated by the Dravidians. This theory raises the whole question of the invasions of India by foreign invaders, the conquests made by them, and the social and cultural institutions which have resulted therefrom. According to Mr. Rice, there have been two separate invasions of India. First is the invasion of India by the Dravidians. They conquered the non Dravidian Aborigines, the ancestors of the Untouchables, and made them untouchable. The second invasion is the invasion of India by the Aryans. The Aryans conquered the Dravidians. He does not say how the conquering Aryans treated the conquered Dravidians. If pressed for an answer, he might say they made them Shudras. So that we get a chain. The Dravidians invaded India and conquered the Aborigines and made them untouchables. After Dravidians came the Aryans. The Aryans conquered the Dravidians and made them Shudras. The theory is too mechanical, a mere speculation, and too simple to explain a complicated set of facts relating to the origin of the Shudras and the untouchables. When students of ancient Indian history delve into the ancient past, they do often come across four names: Aryans, Dravidians, Dasas, and Nagas. What do these names indicate? This question has never been considered. Are these names, Aryans, Dravidians, Dasas, and Nagas, the names of different races, or are they merely different names for a people of the same race? The general assumption is that they are of different races. It is an assumption on which theories like that of Mr. Rice, which seek to explain the social structure of the Hindu society, particularly its class base, are built. Before such a theory is accepted, it is necessary to examine its foundations. Starting with the Aryans, it is beyond dispute that they were not a single homogeneous people. That they were divided into two sections is beyond dispute. It is also beyond dispute that they had two different cultures. One of them may be called the Rig Vedic Aryans and the other the Atharva Vedic Aryans. Their cultural cleavage appears to be complete. The Rig Vedic Aryans believed in Yajna. The Atharva Vedic Aryans believed the Magis. Their mythologies were different. The Rig Vedic Aryans believed in the deluge and the creation of their race from Manu. The Atharva Vedic Aryans did not believe in deluge but believed in the creation of their race from Brahma or Prajapati. Their literary developments also lay along different paths. The Rig Vedic Aryans produced Brahmanas, Sutras, and Aranyakas. The Atharva Vedic Aryans produced the Upanishads. Their cultural conflict was so great that the Rig Vedic Aryans would not for a long time admit the sanctity of the Atharva Veda nor of the Upanishads, and when they did recognize it, they called it Vedanta, which, contrary to the current meaning of the word, namely essence of the Vedas, originally meant something outside the boundary of the Vedas and therefore not so sacred as the Vedas, and regarded its study as Anuloma. Whether these two sections of Aryans were two different races, we do not know. We do not know whether the word Aryan is a term indicative of race. Historians have therefore made a mistake in proceeding on the assumptions that the Aryans were a separate race. A greater mistake lies in differentiating the Dasas from the Nagas. The Dasas are the same as the Nagas. Dasas is merely another name for Nagas. It is not difficult to understand how the Nagas came to be called Dasas in the original Vedic literature. Dasa is a Sanskritized form of the Indo-Iranian word Dahaka, and Dahaka was the name of the king of the Nagas. Consequently, the Aryans called the Nagas after the name of their king Dahaka, which in its Sanskrit form becomes Dasa, a generic name applied to all the Nagas. Who were the Nagas? Undoubtedly, they were non Aryan. A careful study of the Vedic literature reveals a spirit of conflict, of a dualism, and a race for superiority between two distinct types of culture and thought. In the Rig Veda, we are first introduced to the snake god in the form of Ahivitra, the enemy of the Aryan god Indra. Naga, the name under which the snake god was to become so famous in later days, does not appear in the early Vedic literature. Even when it does for the first time in the Satapatha Brahmana 9:2:7:12, it is not clear whether a great snake or a great elephant is meant. But this does not conceal the nature of Ahivitra, since he is described always in the Rig Veda as the serpent who lay around or hidden in waters and as holding a full control of the waters of the heaven and earth alike. It is also evident from the hymns that refer to Ahivitra that he received no worship from the Aryan tribes and was only regarded as an evil spirit of considerable power who must be fought down. The mention of the Nagas in the Rig Veda shows that the Nagas were a very ancient people. It must also be remembered that the Nagas were in no way an aboriginal or uncivilized people. History shows a very close association by intermarriage between the Naga people with the royal families of India. The Devagiri record of the Kadamba king Krishnavarma connects the beginning of the Kadamba Kula with the Nagas. The Roya grant of the 9th century AD mentions the marriage of Aswathama with Nagi and the foundation of the Pallava line by Skandasishya. The issue of this marriage. Virakurcha, who according to another Pallava inscription dated in the 9th century AD was the ruler of the dynasty, is also mentioned in the same inscription as having married a Nagi and obtained from her the insignia of royalty. The marriage of Gautamiputra, the son of the Vataka king Pravarsena, with the daughter of the Bharasiva king Bhavanaga is a historical fact. So is the marriage of Chandragupta too with Princess Kuvera Naga of the Naga Kula. A Tamil poet asserts that Kokili, an early Chola king, had married a Naga princess, and Rajendra Chola is also credited to have won by his gradient beauty the hand of the noble daughter of the Naga race. The Nava the Navasahasanka Charita describes the marriage of the Paramara king Sindhuraja, who seems to have reigned towards the early part of the 10th century AD, with the Naga princess Sasiprabha, with such exhaustive details in so matter of fact a manner as to make us almost feel certain that there must have been some historical basis for this assertion. From the Harsha inscription of VS 1030 to 973 AD, we know that Govaka I, who was the sixth king in the genealogy upwards from Vrigraharaja Chamhamana, and thus might be supposed to have been ruling towards the middle of the 9th century, was famous as a hero in the assemblies of the Nagas and other princes. Sanatikara of the Bhauman dynasty of Odisha, whose dates was most probably 921 AD, is mentioned in an inscription of his son as having married Tribhauna Mahadevi of the Naga family. Not only did the Naga people occupy a high cultural level, but history shows that they ruled a good part of India. That Maharashtra is the home of the Nagas goes without saying. Its people and its king were Nagas. That Andhra Desha and its neighborhood were under the Nagas during the early centuries of the Christian era is suggested by evidence from more sources than one. The Satavahanas and their successors, the Chutukula Satakarnis, drew their blood more or less from the Naga stock. As Dr. H.C. Roy Chaudhary has pointed out, the Dvatrima Satpukalita represents Salivahana, the mythological representative of the Satavahana dynasty of mixed Brahman and Naga origin. This is simply and amply attested to by the typical Naga names which occur in their dynastic lists. That the Naga grew to be very powerful towards the end of the Satavahana rule is also proved by a number of facts. A chief called Skandanaga is found ruling the Bellari district in the reign of Pulumavi, the last king of the main Satavahana line. Secondly, Naga Mulanika, the daughter of the Chutu king, is mentioned as making a gift of a Naga together with her son who is called Sivakanda Nagashri. All the known kings of this line bear the same name and thus prove a close association with the Nagas. Thirdly, the name of Uragapura, the capital of Soringoi, suggests not an isolated reign of one Naga king but a Naga settlement in that locality of tolerably long duration. From Buddhist tradition of Ceylon and Siam, we also know that there were a Naga country called Majarika near the diamond sands, that is Karachi. Then, during the 3rd and early part of the 4th century AD, northern India also was ruled by a number of Naga kings, is clearly proved by the Puranic as well as numismatic and epigraphic evidence. Three independent groups of Vidisha, Kampavati or Padmavati and Mathura are distinctly mentioned in such a way as to leave little doubt of their importance. The name Bhavanaga, the only known king of the Bhara Siva dynasty, also seems to connect him with the Nagas. It is not possible to enter here into a discussion of the coins of the second group or the question of identification of the Achyuta Ganapati Naga or Nagasena of Allahabad pillar inscription with these Puranic Naga kings. Of all the Nagas referred to in ancient Indian history, the North Indian Naga houses of the 4th century AD stand out as the most prominent and historically the most tangible. We do not know whether Nagabhatta and his son Maharaja Moheshwara Naga of the Lahore Copper Seal belonged to any of these three groups or formed a separate Naga family by themselves. But all this sufficiently justifies the conclusion of Dr. C. Roy Chaudhary that the Kushana kingdom of northern India disappeared in the 4th century AD, having been conquered by the Nagas. These Nagas must have been ruling over different portions of Uttarapatha till they were subsequently in themselves swept away from the conquering arms of Samudragupta. As late as the time of Skandagupta, however, we find one Sarvanaga as the governor of Antarvedi in the neighborhood of Saurashtra and Bharukacha. Especially, the Nagas seem to have held a prominent position down to the 6th century AD. From the Junagadh inscription, Skandagupta appears to have dealt severely with the Naga rebellion. In 570 AD, Dadda I Gurjara uprooted the Nagas, who have been identified with the jungle tribes ruled over by Brihul Laka of Brawach. Dhruvasena II's grant of GS 334 645 AD also mentions as Dutaka the Pramatri Srinaga. The next important revival of the Nagas, particularly in central India, seems to date about the 9th century AD. In 800 AD, Maharaja Tivaravadeva of Sripura in Kosala most probably defeated the Naga tribe. Sometime after this period, we also note two different references to Nagas in the inscriptions of Bengal. The Ramganj record of Mahamandalika Ishwara Ghosh introduces us to a Ghosh Nag family of Dhekari which was to be assigned to 11th century AD. The Bhuvaneshwara Prashasti of Bhatta Bhavadeva, the minister of Hari Varmadeva in the 12th century AD, also refers to the destruction of Naga kings by him. The Ramcharitra mentions the conquest of Utkal, the kingdom of Bhava Bhushan Santati by Rampal, but it is not clear whether in this case the Nagas or the Chandras were meant. The greater probability would, however, lie in favor of the former, since they were the more well known. It was in the period 10th century to 12th century AD that the different branches of the Sendraka, Sindha or Chindaka family, which themselves called themselves lords of Bhogavati and Nagavanshi, gradually spread themselves over different portions of central India, particularly Bastar. The Nagatras of Begur too appear in an inscription of the 10th century AD as having fought against King Viramahendra on behalf of the West Ganga king Erayappa and being distinguished for bravery in the fight. If the evidence of Nava Sanka Charita is accepted, then the Naga king, whose daughter Sashi Prabha was married to Sindhuraja Paramara, must have also been ruling in Ratnavad on the Narmada about this period. Who are the Dravidians? Are they different from the Nagas? Share they two different names for a people of the same race? The popular view is that the Dravidians and the Nagas are names of two different races. Their statement is bound to shock many people. Nonetheless, it is a fact, and that the term Dravidians and Nagas are merely two different names for the same people. It is not to be denied that very few will be prepared to admit the proposition that the Dravidians and Nagas are merely two different names for the same people, and fewer that the Dravidians as Nagas occupied not merely South India, but they occupied the whole of India, south as well as north. Nonetheless, these are historical truths. Let us see what the authorities have to say on the subject. This is what Mr. Dikshitar, a well known South Indian scholar, has to say on the subject in his paper on South India in the Ramayana. The Nagas, another tribe semi-divine in character, with their totems as serpents, spread throughout India from Takshashila in the northwest to Assam in the northeast and to Ceylon and South India in the south. At one time, they must have been very powerful. Contemporaneous with the Yakwas, or perhaps subsequent to their fall as a political entity, the Nagas rose to prominence in South India. Not only parts of Ceylon, but ancient Malabar were the territories occupied by the ancient Nagas. In the Tamil classics of the early centuries after Christ, we hear frequent references to Naganadu. Remnants of Naga worship are still lingering in Malabar, and the temple in Nagarcoil in South Travancore is dedicated to Naga worship even today. All that can be said about them is that they were a seafaring people. Their women folk were renowned for their beauty. Apparently, the Nagas had become merged with the Cheras who rose to power and prominence at the commencement of the Christian era. Further light is thrown on the subject by C.F. Oldham, who has made a deep study of it. According to Mr. Oldham, the Dravidian people have been divided from ancient times into Cheras, Cholas, and Pandyas. Chera or Sena in Old Tamil Sarai, in the Dravidian equivalent for Naga, Chera Mandala, Naga Dvipa, or the Naga country. This seems to point distinctly to the Asura origin of the Dravidians of the south. But in addition to this, there still exists, widely spread over the Ganges Valley, a people who call themselves Cherus or Seoris and who claim descent from the serpent gods. The Cherus are of very ancient race. They are believed to have once held a great portion of the valley of the Ganges, which, as we have already seen, was occupied in very early times by Naga tribes. The Cherus appear to have been gradually ousted from their lands during the troublous times of the Mohammedan invasions, and they are now poor and almost landless. There can be little doubt that these people are kinsmen of the Dravidian Cheras. The Cherus have peculiarly distinct and several customs, and amongst them one which seems to connect them with the Lichavis as well as the Nevards of Nepal. This is the election of a Raja for every 5 or 6 houses and his investiture in due form with the tilak or royal frontal mark. Both Lichavis and Nevards had many customs in common with the Dravidians of the south. Each venerated the serpent Karkotakanaga being to Nepal what Nilanaga was to Kashmir. A Naga too was the tutelary deity of Vaishali, the Lichavi capital. The marital relations of Nevars and Lichavis closely resembled those of the Tamil people and go far to show a common origin. Property amongst the Nevars descended in the female line, as it might did among the Aratas, Bahikas, or Takhas of the Punjab, whose sisters, sons, and not their own were their heirs. This is still a Dravidian custom. In short, a recent Dravidian writer, Mr. Balakrishna Nair, says that his people appear to be in nearly every particular, the kinsfolk of the Nevars. Besides all this, however, there are other links connecting the Naga people of the south with those of the north of India. In an inscription discovered by Colonel Todd at Kanzwa near the river Chambal, a Raja called Salindra of the race of Sarya, a tribe renowned amongst the tribes of the mighty, is said to be the ruler of Takya. This was evidently the Takya or Taka kingdom of the Punjab, which was visited by Hugh Tse and which has been already referred to. It seems therefore that the Naga people of Takya were known also by the name of Sarya. Again, in the outer Himalayas between the Sutlej and the Beas valleys is a tract of country called Sara or Siraj. In this district, the Naga demigods are the chief deities worshipped. There is another Siraj in the upper Chenab valley, and this too is occupied by a Naga worshipping people. The term Siraj or Siraj appears to be the same as the Sarya of Colonel Todd's inscription and as Seri, which is the alternative name of the Cherus of the Ganga Valley. It is also seems to be identical with Sarai, which we have already seen is the old Tamil name for the Chera or the Naga. Apparently, therefore, the Saryas or Takya, the Saraj people of the Sutlej Valley, the Seris or Cherus of the valley of the Ganges, and the Cheras, Seras, or Kirakis of southern India are but different branches of the same Naga worshipping people. It may be noted too that in some of the Himalayan dialects, Kira or Kiri means a serpent, and this name, from which was perhaps derived the term Kirati or Kiranti, so often applied to the people of the Himalayas, is often found in the Rajatarangini, where it is applied to the people in or near Kashmir. The Kiras are mentioned by Vaharam Mehra and in a copper plate published by Professor Kiel Home. An inscription at the Bajinath temple in the Kangra valley gives kilograms as then the name of the place, and this in this local dialect would mean the village of serpents. The Naga is still a popular deity at Bajinath and throughout the neighboring country. The term Kira is thus an equivalent for Naga, and it can scarcely be doubted that the serpent worshipping Kiras of the Himalayas were closely related to the Dravidian Keras, Cheras, or Keralas of the south. Similarly, a name is not always to be trusted, but here we have something more. Those people and these people whose designation is thus apparently the same are all of the solar race. They are venerate the hooded serpent and they all worship as ancestors the Naga demigods. From the foregoing, it would seem tolerably certain that the Dravidians of southern India were of the same stock as the Nagas or Asuras of the north. It is thus clear that the Nagas and Dravidians are one and the same people. Even with this much of proof, people may not be found ready to accept this thesis. The chief difficulty in the way by accepting it lies in the designation of the people of the south by the name Dravidian. It is natural for them to ask why the term Dravidian has come to be restricted to the people of South India if they are really Nagas. Critics are bound to ask if the Dravidians and the Nagas are the same people, why is the name Nagas not used to designate people of South India too? This is no doubt a puzzle, but it is a puzzle which is not beyond solution. It can be solved if certain facts are borne in mind. The first thing to be borne in mind is the situation regarding language. Today, the language of the southern India differs from that of the people of northern India. Was this always so? On this question, the observations of Mr. Oldham are worth attention. It is evident that the old Sanskrit grammarians considered the language of the Dravidian countries to be connected with the vernaculars of northern India, and that in their opinion it was especially related to the speech of those people who, as we have seen, were apparently descendants of the Asura tribes. Thus, in the Sahasha Chandrika, Lakshmidhara says that the Paishachi language is spoken in the Paishachi countries of Pandya, Chaka, Vahalika, Sahaya, Nepala, Kuntala, Sudesha, Bhota, Gandhara, Haiva, and Kanauj, and that these are the Paishachi countries. Of all the vernacular dialects, the Paishachi is said to have contained the smallest infusion of Sanskrit. That the Asuras originally spoke a language which differed from that of the Arya seems evident. Several passages are quoted by Professor Muir from the Rig Veda in which the word Mridavach is applied to the speech of the Asuras. Of these passages, Professor Muir observes the word Mridavach, which I have translated injuriously speaking, is explained by Sayana as meaning one whose organs of speech are destroyed. The original meaning of the expression was doubtless that the language of the Asuras were more or less unintelligible to the Aryas. The same explanation will apply to another passage in the Rig Veda where it is said, "May we, by propitiating Indra, conquer the ill speaking man." From the Satapada Brahmana, we find that the Asuras, being deprived of speech, were undone, crying Helava. Helava, such was the unintelligible speech which they uttered, and he who speaks this is a Mlecha. Hence, let no Brahman speak barbarous language, since such is the speech of the Asuras. We learn from Manu that those tribes who are outside of the class produced from the mouth, arms, thighs, and feet of Brahman, whether they speak the language of the Mlechas or of the Aryas, are called Dasyus. In the time of Manu, therefore, the Aryan language and that of the Mlechas or Asuras were both in use. At the period described in the Mahabharata, however, the Asuran language must have almost died out amongst the Aryanized tribes, as Vidura addressed Yudhishthira in the Mlecha tongue so as to be unintelligible to all except Yudhishthira. At a later period than this, however, the grammarian Rama Tarka Vagesa refers to those who speak like Nagas. It would seem, therefore, that the unregenerate Asuras retained the tongue as well as the religion and customs of their forefathers long after their converted brethren had discarded them. It was evidently among these unregenerate tribes that the Paishachi dialects were in use, and amongst all these tribes, as we have seen, were the Dravidian Pandyas. This view that the Tamil and cognate tongues were founded upon by the ancient Asura speech is very strongly confirmed by the fact that the language of the Brahvis, a tribe on the borders of Sindh, has been found to be very closely allied to them. Indeed, Dr. Caldwell says the Brahvi language enables us to trace the Dravidian race beyond the Indus to the southern confines of Central Asia. This country, as I have already pointed out, was the home of the Ashuras or the Nagas, to which race apparently belonged the founders of the Dravidian kingdoms. Taken into consideration all the evidence which has been brought forward, the only possible conclusion seems to be that the Dravidians of the south of India were of the same stock as the Asuras or Nagas of the north. The second thing to be borne in mind is that the word Dravida is itself not an original word. It is the Sanskritized word or form of the word Tamil. The original word Tamil, when imported into Sanskrit, became Damita, and later on Tamila became Dravida. The word Dravida is the name of the language of the people and does not denote the race of the people. The third thing to remember is that Tamil or Dravida was not merely the language of South India, but before the Aryans came, it was the language of the whole of India and was spoken from Kashmir to Cape Cameron. In fact, it was the language of the Nagas throughout India. The next thing to note is that the contact between the Aryan and the Nagas and the effect it produced on the Nagas and their language. Strange as it may appear, the effect of this contact on the Nagas of North India was quite different from the effect it produced on the Nagas of South India. The Nagas in North India gave up Tamil, which was their mother tongue, and adopted Sanskrit in its place. The Nagas in South India retained Tamil as their mother tongue and did not adopt Sanskrit, the language of the Aryans. If this difference is borne in mind, it will help to explain why the name Dravida came to be applied only to the people of South India. The necessity for the application of the term Dravida to the Nagas of the northern India has ceased because they had ceased to speak the Dravida language. But so far as the Nagas of South India are concerned, not only the propriety of calling them Dravida has remained in view of their adherence to the Dravida language, but the necessity of calling them Dravida had become very urgent in view of their being the only people speaking the Dravida language after the Nagas of the North had ceased to use it. This is the real reason why the people of the South have come to be called Dravidians. The special application of the use of the word Dravida for the people of South India must not therefore obscure the fact that the Nagas and the Dravidas are one and the same people. They are only two different names for the same people. Nagas was a racial or cultural name and Dravida was their linguistic name. Thus, the Dasas are the same as the Nagas and the Nagas are the same as the Dravidians. In other words, what we can say about the races of India is that there have been at most only two races in the field, namely the Aryans and the Nagas. Obviously, the theory of Mr. Rice must fall to the ground, for it postulates three races in action when, as a matter of fact, we see that there are only two. The end.